everyone. My name is Alisa Sosa. I am a research assistant working on the Dana Career Network in Neuroscience and Society project. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Farron McIntee, who is a Dana Foundation Fellow in Neuroscience and Society and works to build programs in Dana NextGen. So Dr. McIntee, I'd love if you could talk to us a bit about your work at the Dana Foundation, as well as the career path that led you to pursue a career in neuroscience and society.
So I guess I should start at by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and I attended Spelman College for undergrad. So I have a degree in chemistry from Spelman. And while I was at Spelman, I had an opportunity to participate in undergraduate research through two programs, the MBRS RISE program and the Mark U Star Honors program. And so through that, those experiences, that kind of put me on a path to pursue a biomedical science PhD in graduate school. So I attended New York University, it's called the Vilcek Institute for Graduate Biomedical Sciences. And while I was there, my thesis project was on Alzheimer's disease. And so, obviously Alzheimer's disease impacts the brain and the nervous system, particularly learning and memory. And so kind of through my, obviously I was it was a protein chemistry lab, but through my experience of working in that lab, I really grew to better understand how devastating the disease could be. And so as a part, not necessarily a part, I guess as a complement to my research training, I also decided that I wanted to run the New York City Marathon. And I had an opportunity to raise funds for and run with the Alzheimer's Association New York City Marathon team. And so many of the people on the team had family members who had Alzheimer's disease, and they were also sometimes care providers. And so they were really excited to get to know me as while you're doing Alzheimer's research. But kind of through that experience, I really kind of identified that there was like a large gap between the general public, or the people who are impacted by the research and the people who are actually conducting the research, because a lot of times, many people interact with neuroscience research and neuroscience research results through, the media, for example, in print or, television and digital media and things like that. And so a lot of times, the findings are kind of distilled and give people the wrong impression. So I kind of just was basically understanding there was a little bit of a gap between, basic research and like its clinical applications and, how close, for example, like there is really no known cure or really, impactful treatment for Alzheimer's disease. And so, there were, so many people who were looking for hope, for example, like, really wanting to have, some concrete information about what they could do to help their loved ones. And, they didn't necessarily understand, so they understood, but, I just identified that gap. And so that kind of was always in the back of my mind that, there definitely is a gap and, thinking about ways that I could address it. I think also just outside of that, it's one of those things I experienced when I went to, going to college. And, in some cases there were, students who didn't necessarily like, like they wanted to, like, for example, in my chemistry classes, who were majoring in chemistry or, wanting, like, pursuing a pre-med track and really having a challenging time with their STEM coursework. And sometimes like the information wasn't made as accessible, or it really felt sometimes insurmountable for people to be successful in the in their coursework. But it wasn't necessarily because, that they weren't capable, but it was just like, there was some way about like the way the information was presented to them that didn't resonate with them. And so it made it more challenging for them to be successful in the courses. So I was also always kind of thinking about ways that science could be more accessible. So I talked about my undergraduate, like my graduate school experience, and that I was working in an Alzheimer's disease research lab. And so I completed my thesis work. And from after completing graduate school, I went to Washington University in St. Louis to do a postdoc. And during my postdoc, I studied fatty acid metabolism in the brain. And so I was still involved in, neuroscience research. But again, the lab that I worked in was kind of like a clinical and translational lab. And so for my postdoc, I was studying a receptor, or like studying a phenomenon that definitely had clinical and societal implications. But again, I felt kind of detached. Basically, I didn't necessarily see how from my role, as a researcher studying that smaller thing, not the smaller thing, but, working on that project was going to have a broader impact. I think, and all along, while I was, in graduate school and also during my postdoc, I was also very involved with, during my graduate school, I was a co-president of my student council. In graduate school, I was very active on the postdoctoral society. So I was also kind of interested in kind of doing research, but also like some administrative pieces and connecting people and those kinds of pieces. And so I was always kind of working on my administrative skills while I was in graduate school. And so after I completed my postdoc, rather than pursuing like a tenure track position or, staying in, bench research, I had an opportunity to return to Detroit at Wayne State University, where I spent a number of years working with a program, an NIH-funded program called the Rebuild Detroit Scholars Program. And so it used my background in, science, but it was also combined my kind of like administrative skill set. And I was working with the program. So I was working in an undergraduate research program. So I spent many years doing that. And then because it was a grant-funded position, I came to a point where I wanted to, think about what my next steps were going to be. Was I going to stay in higher ed, or was I going to move, to find something different? And so I think one of the things that was so now I'm currently working as a fellow in neuroscience and society at the Dana Foundation. And the reason that I applied for this particular fellowship and this opportunity was that, it kind of brought everything full circle, and that, I had a neuroscience research background. I was always kind of, I also had like a lot of administrative skills, but the opportunity to work in a grant making organization and to be able to, be a part of a team that was going to make, impactful, do something impactful and address the gap that I had identified back in graduate school, kind of like that gap between, I don't necessarily want to say consumers of research, but the individuals who really benefit from the research that's being conducted, and like recognizing that gap, working through in this fellowship, would provide me an opportunity to address that gap. So that is my career path. So undergrad, graduate school, postdoc. I worked at a university for some time and then had the opportunity to come to the Dana Foundation.
What do you consider to be the best aspects and the most challenging aspects of pursuing a career in neuroscience and society?
The best aspect is so I think the concept of neuroscience and society isn't necessarily new, because there's always been kind of like a gap in like understanding that, society itself is not like neuroscience isn't necessarily centered around society, but I think the idea of building a field, and so not knowing what you don't know quite yet. And so I think one of the things that's really most important is being adaptable, and adjusting to things, and also just being very kind of open, because and also not necessarily because the field of neuroscience is society, even though the foundation is we're kind of building the field, we're not necessarily the voice of the field. We can be a thought leader, but also making sure that we leave space for other voices and other ideas. So it's really thinking about building a field, but not skewing it towards one direction, and really letting the field develop in itself. So that's one thing for sure. I think the best aspects, it's really meeting new people, and the ideas that are coming forward, and having the opportunity to work with and meet people who are also really kind of motivated and working towards a common goal. I think that's one of those things. I guess I trying to figure out the best way to I'm definitely very, very people oriented. So, meeting new people and building, and also, thinking about the role you can play, and, helping to really, make things make things better, and kind of going back to I do really feel so that gap I talked about, that that I observed in graduate school, not now really feeling there is something that I can do that can improve that, and that can address it, and so hopefully that won't exist in that way anymore.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your advice, and for being here with us today. So I want to remind our audience that more interviews such as this one are available at our website, neuroxcareers.org. And once again, thank you, Dr. McIntee, for sharing.
It was my pleasure.